Welcome back to Unpacking Ideas, and thanks for tuning in if you're new here. Today, we're going to be unpacking the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. Helping me unpack this book today was Reverend Magus Amon Greene. Amon is the professor of comparative religion, philosophy, and Tai Chi at Tacoma Community College in Washington State. He is also a practitioner of Tai Chi, martial arts, massage therapy, Chinese medicine, and the author of a brand new translation of the Tao Te Ching. In our conversation today, we talked about Amon's journey with Taoism, the historical context of the Tao Te Ching, Taoism's relationship with Confucianism. We talked at length about Wu Wei, the logic of Wu Wei practices, Wu Wei government. Then, towards the end of our conversation, we got into some of the more metaphysical aspects of the Tao, confusing words with things, the Chinese concept of De, Qi, Yin and Yang, and the cyclical nature of everything. I really enjoyed this conversation. As you'll hear, Amon gives a lot of great historical context and personal stories to really make these ideas accessible. So I think whether you're new to Taoism or you're already well-versed in Taoist thought, this conversation will have something for everyone. So let's get into it. Here it is, my conversation with Amon on the Tao Te Ching. All right. Welcome, Amon. It's great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks, Zach. It's good to be here.
Yeah. So we met actually through a mutual friend, Jason Pang, who I actually had on the podcast to discuss the art of war a couple years ago. And you have been actually working with Jason for the last couple of years, translating the Tao Te Ching. Is that correct?
Yeah. The Tao Te Ching and the art of war.
Oh, I didn't realize you guys did art of war as well.
We've done 3 translations. We've done the Tao Te Ching, we did the art of war, and we did Confucius Analects, and then we did the Tao Te Ching again.
Wow.
Because as Jason said, we got better with practice.
Okay. So you kind of, after doing all of those, you realized you weren't kind of satisfied with your current translation, and just kind of wanted another
more or
stab
less. He said, "We got to do this again," and I said, "No," and then we did it again, and I'm grateful we did.
Cool, yeah. Well, your process has been cool. I mean, you've been hosting these like meetups on it and kind of going through chapter by chapter, and I've tagged along for a few of them. So you kind of will go through the chapter, explain to the group, why you chose to translate it the way you did. And, you have some very bright people in the group who will kind of, grill you on, well, why'd you use this word versus this word? And
yeah, it's like going to an academic conference to present your papers every week.
Yeah. Which sounds good for you, but also maybe a little daunting. But I guess that's how you improve.
It is good.
Yeah.
It's good. It's good for what we produced, and it's good for us to stay vigilant in the process. We have another meeting next week. We have to make these edits. We have to get this set. We have to get it at least presentable. And it's nice because those meetings are recorded, and so how the sausage was made is there for posterity for all to see.
Yeah, I can definitely identify with that idea of, just having something on the calendar to kind of light a fire under your ass. I mean, that's kind of how I feel about this podcast as well. It's just, so you're in the process of publishing as well. So
hoping to, whether or not we get picked up by a publisher or whether we self-publish. The final product needs revisions again for consistency, for, readability, and to take all of sort of our brain candy that's on there and scrub it down to, no, this is actually what people would want from this. Yeah.
I'll be sure to direct people where they can find it as well, like in the show notes as well, if people are listening to this in the future, which I'm sure they will be. So I wanted to kind of start by asking a little bit about how you got into all this stuff, kind of like what's your story, how you came upon the Tao Te Ching.
The thumbnail version, I was raised in a dojo. I started martial arts when I was 4 years old, and I was amateur competitor with Olympic hopes in my future, got into a car wreck and it left me on a cane for about 2 years, and also ended my competitive martial arts.
What martial art specifically was it?
I started with Taekwondo and then did Harangdo, and since I got actually into nationals, I did additional training in I've probably done at least a dozen martial arts in terms of a glossing familiarity, but spent a majority of my youth, at least, with those sort of kickboxing styles.
Got it.
That came to an end, and trying to kickbox on a cane is not possible.
Yeah.
No matter how much you continue to try. And rehabbing was a process. And through the rehabbing, chiropractors, sports medicine, osteopaths, I found a massage therapist. And I gave that therapist more credit for getting me off of that cane than anybody else. And in that sort of introduction of martial arts, I also had encountered Tai Chi, which my coach insisted I do. And as a young adolescent, I hated. In the rehab process, not only did I get introduced to massage therapy, but I also started practicing that Tai Chi a little more because I could still do that. Those kind of came together, and then the opportunity to go to massage school came up. I went, and when I got introduced to traditional Chinese medicine, it was like bing, 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 all the bits and pieces of things I had heard in the dojo and heard growing up. Now, suddenly, there was this framework for it. And my interest in Chinese medicine led me eventually to the Tao Te Ching and Taoism. And that sort of launched 1,000 ships in my life. That sort of put me on a course to where I am now, finishing up translations of the Tao Te Ching.
Super cool. So it sounds like you were kind of able to identify some of these kind of like underlying principles, both in Tai Chi and in Chinese medicine. Is that kind of where you're talking about with the bing, bing, bing? Like you started making some connections between...
So you're in a dojo and you're told to ki, you're told to breathe into your hara, and that would be the Japanese version of tian den in Chinese. And you want explosive chi, and you just hear these nebulous ideas, and they don't have any context. They don't have any description. When you get into Tai Chi, it becomes more esoteric. Now you're hearing about, focus on, the flow of yin in your body. Try and expand more yang. And that is, especially as an adolescent, just a bridge too far. All I want to do is kick somebody in the head and be a ninja.
You only want the yang, right?
Yeah. But then when you start studying Chinese medicine, the predicate of Chinese medicine is qi. And so because of that, suddenly you actually get context for some of the things that I heard in the dojo and I heard from, teachers growing up. And that sort of put all of that together for me in a way that it was like, oh, this isn't just somebody talking, about some sort of nebulous idea. It has context. It has, procedure. Here's the corpus of work that has gone into this teacher telling me, focus on your hara. Okay. Even if they don't know. And I'd venture to guess many have not done sort of the deep delving dive that I have done now, but I still see it, in all kinds of places. And it makes other aspects of just Asian culture start to open up to you, where you're like, oh, that's why those are like that. That's why this, that's why that.
Well, so maybe we can start kind of talking a little bit about the Tao.
Sure.
So one of the things you said in one of your meetups was the concept of Wu Wei is the number 1, number 2, and number 3 lesson in the Tao Te Ching. And so that I kind of flagged that in my mind of, okay, like, yeah, it'd probably be a good place to start there. So a lot of people aren't going to be familiar with this idea, but maybe we can start with Wu Wei, and then maybe later we'll get into the kind of more metaphysical aspect of the Tao Te Ching.
Okay. I can absolutely talk about that. And I'll give the 20-second history to explain it. After almost 400 years of a stable government, it started to disintegrate and just fall apart in ancient China. And we go from the Springs and Autumns period to what's called the Warring States period, where literally everyone is at war with everyone. This is when these texts arise, and it's when these thinkers start looking around going, what went wrong and what do we do about it? And so that's why you get thinkers like Sun Tzu, Confucius, Han Feizi, Mo Tzu, the list goes on, and Lao Tzu and the Tao Te Ching.
Yep.
There were some very successful thinkers who managed to capture the attention of leaders of state, and those leaders would apply their ideas. Legalism, Confucianism, and Taoism became sort of the leading three. But Confucianism, hands down, far and wide, was the big overall winner through Chinese history. It was the predominant ethos, in the same way that Lord Alfred Whitehead said all of Western philosophy are footnotes to Plato. Almost all of Eastern philosophy or Chinese philosophy are footnotes to Confucius. And so Confucius had a very proactive prescription for trying to engage in running the state and making things right, to his mind. Wu Wei is the opposite of his prescription. It is all this effort, all this trying. You can envision somebody who is slaving over their studies, trying to get the score on the SAT so they get the job, so they're in the position, so they can enact these changes. And then they've got to deal with all these underlings who don't understand. Their boss is an idiot. I mean, we have this in the modern world. And the Tao Te Ching and Lao Tzu and the authors who saw that said, that's a fool's errand. What you're doing is both actually not working and you're killing yourself. And,
well, could I kind of jump in here and ask something? So my understanding of kind of what this reaction was to, so the Confucian way is all about rituals, right? And kind of you're becoming very ritualistic in order to kind of correct your behavior, and to the extent
polishing and grinding. Yeah, that's kind of the idiom for Confucianism. Polish and grind, polish and grind, polish and grind.
Not to be culturally insensitive, but some of it almost sounds a little bit like obsessive compulsive. When you hear Confucius talk about, like, I will only sit on my mat if it is completely straight. I will never lift my gaze above this, like, you know, so it's very rigid in that way.
If you want to see Confucianism on steroids, just do a little study of, like, not even that historical, Japan. Japan is a highly, highly Confucianistic culture with highly determinative rituals. Yeah, that was the result, even though that wasn't necessarily what Confucius was prescribing per se. It's how it got enacted in reality. And most of the scholars who would be contributors to something like the Tao Te Ching probably has its origins very possibly earlier than the Analects. At least historically, it's treated that way. But it was written with the additions of many authors over many centuries before you get a text that, you read today. And Confucius scholars were already busy in the action of trying to take government. These were scholars as well who probably got raised the same way, but much like, the dropouts of college who were just too smart for their own good, these scholars were the ones who said, this is dumb. This polishing and grinding crap, this is not getting us anywhere. So Wu Wei becomes Lao Tzu's prescription for leadership, which is for leadership in a political sense at the time, but for leading your life later. And that's how it gets understood for centuries. Wu just means without, not, no. Wei is action. It's to do something. So literally, Wu Wei, without action.
Yeah.
But this is probably one of the most misinterpreted terms out of Chinese philosophy and Taoism, because people just take that to mean, oh, don't do anything. Sit back, relax, do nothing. You get nearly to that level with Zhuangzi, his interpretation of Wu Wei, which is drop out, let me drag my tail in the mud.
Yeah.
But Lao Tzu and the Tao Te Ching, when they talk about Wu Wei, they also add nothing is left undone. That's chapter 48 in the Tao Te Ching, which I just had here. It says, practice Wu Wei, but nothing is left undone. Literally, it's the fourth line. And that nothing is left undone is the important part of the recipe, because now you're dealing with a paradox. How do I, without action, still achieve results? And the answer is with as little unnecessary action as possible. I personally I had pitched that we would translate Wu Wei as parsimony. It's one of my favorite ways to translate the word. And Jason vetoed it, and I'm kind of glad he did. Retaining certain Chinese words in the text makes the reader of the text engage with the idea on its own terms. And I absolutely agree with that. And Wu Wei is an important enough idea that it deserves that treatment. But parsimony, this idea of economy, stinginess with your efforts, with your actions, with your energies. Don't polish and grind and slave over your textbooks. Do enough and then stop. That's what Lao Tzu is prescribing. Do enough, then stop it.
Well, like knowing when to stop, that phrase comes up a lot.
Knowing when to stop is a big component of Wu Wei.
Or like, would like not overdoing as well, as opposed to defining it as not doing, not overdoing, maybe? Because it's not that you're not doing anything, like you mentioned, right?
There is a lot of advice in the Tao Te Ching, and I didn't actually pull up the chapter about, almost nothing being more dangerous than overdoing it. Overdoing it is the biggest danger that somebody can encounter, according to Lao Tzu. And if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense, because when you overdo, you invite backlash. That's almost inevitable.
I heard a quote recently. You might have heard this as well. It's attributed to various American politics, but the quote is, "Never write what you can say, never say what you can nod, never nod what you can wink, and never wink what the other fellow already knows." And I think it was kind of in the political spirit. It was kind of basically saying, don't like incriminate yourself unnecessarily. Like basically don't leave a paper trail if you can afford not to, because your opponents are going to use your words against you. But it also, to me, kind of speaks to a little bit of this idea of Wu Wei, and that, like, the same way you wouldn't scream at your child and lecture them if you could get them to have the same effect by just raising an eyebrow or something like that.
Right. I think there is something to that. There is an idea that the danger of overdoing is not just in exhausting yourself and inviting backlash, but you leave yourself exposed. You put all your cards on the table. Now you got nothing in reserve. You've got nothing left.
Yeah.
Way as an actionable idea is difficult. It's really hard. But it is the quintessential Taoist lesson. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Begin difficult things when they are easy. These are advices about how Wei is actually applicable. Sometimes it is, and here's where the Confucian Taoist relationship takes a little turn. I said before, these weren't like political partisans at loggerheads. This was more like a relationship of big brother and little brother, with Confucianism being the big brother and Taoism being the little brother needling it. Yeah.
Okay.
But that didn't mean Confucians didn't have some good ideas. There are some good rituals. Putting my keys in the exact same spot every time I come home is a good ritual.
Yeah.
Because I don't have to ever look for them.
Yeah.
Because the effort and energy expended looking everywhere for them is the opposite of Wei. If I want to do enough, maybe I do need a little ritual, and maybe that ritual is acceptable if it's for a real and natural reason, not because somebody prescribed it to me that you should leave your keys in this bowl. This is a key bowl. That's what it's. No. They're on the hook. That's where they go. That's where I grab them. I know they're there. That's a natural ritual. So they're not. Confucianism and Taoism don't disagree on everything.
It seems like they're able to kind of fill in each other's, blind spots a little bit. It seems to me the concept of Wu Wei is also about, you're not only not overdoing it, but you are kind of going along with, the flow, to use the term that's kind of so often spoken, or going with the grain as opposed to against the grain.
You are emulating how existence operates when you are practicing Wu Wei.
I love that. Yeah.
So I told this story at one of the meetups, but a poignant example of this was this summer. I go and float one of the rivers with friends every year in the summer. And it's a great spiritual experience for me because I take the inner tube, put it into the river. I know the direction the river is going to go, and all I have to do is wait. It is quintessential Wu Wei. This year I had a waterproof pack with my phone in it, and the connection on the phone after we hit a bump or something snapped, and the pack went into the water, which was a panic moment for many people around me. Like, especially my partner who was in the river with me. She was, just out of her tube, swimming into the water, trying to get, and I'm watching these people as their cluster of trying to capture this little package floating in the water is not only unsuccessful, but they're actually knocking the thing, all around in the water, and they're trying to hold on to their inner tube. I'm in my inner tube a little ways ahead. I look at the currents. I see whether the rapids are stopping or the rapids are stopping. And I see which way, the debris in the river is flowing and where a leaf goes and where my pack is. And so I grab one of the Frisbees and I paddle the water so that I turn, so that in just a few seconds, there comes my pack and I pick it out of the water. All the panic, all the pump, all the circumstance, all the over effort and terror that some of these people had was because of this overriding human belief that we can make the outcomes be what we want. just by sheer force, just by sheer effort, by sheer intention, by sheer acts of will. Attention and sensitivity to the actual environment, actually not panicking, not giving in to accepting it. And this is why Wu Wei is hard, because for some degree I had to accept, am I going to lose my phone? I might possibly lose my phone. Is that okay? Well, it's not desirable, but if I can accept that it's the possibility, even though I don't want it, now I can just watch the environment around me and see, is there an easy way for me to get this back? And it immediately became clear, yeah, all I got to do is turn 90 degrees and wait 2 minutes. Here it comes. Enough may have been for me to dive out of my tube and go swimming for it. That might have been enough if the situation hadn't made the opportunity the way that it had. And so sometimes Wu Wei, it's not just doing nothing. It could be doing a lot. I might have needed to panic and start swimming quickly because there could have been a falls ahead. But not the actual circumstances. Sensitivity to environment is really, really important to practice this.
I love that story. I mean, for so many reasons. I mean, one, I think it really does illustrate this point well, in that, like, it wasn't only the people's kind of physical effort that was wasted in kind of swimming up the current, but also the psychological effort of panicking and worrying. And, you know, oh my gosh, like, there's so many great quotes. I think there's a Mark Twain quote, something about along the lines of, like, you know, how much energy I've wasted in my life worrying about things that never actually ended up happening. So that could be the overdoing it, you know. The other thing I really like about that story, though, well, two things. I really like that point you mentioned about, you know, it all depends on the exact circumstance. So like you said, there could be circumstances where a lot of effort is needed. But in this current one, you know, you just needed to turn your body 90 degrees and snatch your keys when they floated by. But I also liked it because it kind of uses this metaphor of water, which is something that Lao Tzu uses a lot. Maybe we can talk about water and why water is such a great metaphor for Wu Wei.
Because of water's the. And we haven't talked much about but the very title, Tao Te Ching, it's two separate things, and Ching, the classic of. So we talked a little bit about Tao. De is the second half of the text, or in the Malong Dui, the first half of the text, and the second half is actually chapters 1 through 37. De is what a thing emanates. It is the virtue of. And so in this water, for example, at one point, it had the virtue of calmness and stillness. At another point, it had a virtue of being more rapid and more turbulent. But you could look at it, see it, and observe what its was, what was emanating from it, because it naturally was itself. Humans have but we find ways to log jam it, obfuscate it, muddy and cloud the waters until really observing someone's actual can be tricky. 55 talks about proper in a good Taoist sage, though the sage is not necessarily what everyone's going to be, but those who possess the profundity of are like newborn babies. Here we're talking about, are you your natural virtue? Are you your natural self? And then it goes on to describe what a newborn baby's like, and the fact that this kid can shout at the top of their lungs day in, day out, but they never grow hoarse. You know, they're naturally delighted, or they're naturally upset. They have all these natural things that haven't been obfuscated, haven't been clouded, haven't been muddied. Trying to get back to that is a challenge because it means you have to give up some of the things you've been programmed to treat as important. I have to give up the fact that me losing my phone is a major catastrophic event. Yeah, I wouldn't want to, but is it the most important thing in the world? Probably not. In this moment, is it the most important thing? No. And would it be as important as me drowning? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
It was amusing to watch people who were willing to risk drowning because because this is an umbilical cord in their existence.
Yeah.
Losing that attachment to those things to some degree is not just in the Buddhist sense of giving up all attachments. I mean, I'm very attached to my thumbs. I want to keep them.
Yeah.
I was pretty attached to my hearing, and I'm pretty sad that it's disintegrating as I age. But finding a way to emulate or emanate your authentic duh is a process of removing those sort of prescribed values, those prescribed expectations, and finding out what natural is. A baby a moral agent? It's almost not a question that somebody can answer because it's nonsensical. How is a baby moral or immoral? They have no higher cognitive faculties for figuring out whether their actions are right or wrong, but they do things, and they do have a sense of, this is what I should do, this is what I shouldn't do, this is what I like, this is what I don't like. And nobody's had to teach them that. So learning to enhance and empower your duh is learning how to be more authentically yourself, more genuinely yourself, and not like the genuine self who wrote out a vision statement or a personal mission statement or figured out how to write, your SMART goals out. And I'm actually bringing this up because I actually have to teach all this.
Yeah.
Which is the opposite of teaching duh. But it's almost like you have to go the long road back.
So one of the books that I had read, actually I think it was your recommendation, was called Trying Not to Try by Edward Slingerland. And the way that he defines duh, he talks about it as a kind of charisma that emanates from a person who is acting in accordance with the Tao or acting accordance to the Wei. Is that a way to think about it? Like, in a way, they're kind of so in alignment and in sync and kind of in their own authenticity that, people want to be around them, people want them to work with them, etc. It's a kind of charisma, or is it more than that? Or is that only part of the definition?
I did a workshop for instructing, for teaching. The trainer was saying, if you want to be effective, you can't fake that. And then they said, here. They showed a couple of video clips. One was a lecturer. I don't even remember what they were lecturing on. The structure of the lecture was really clear. They had it on a PowerPoint on a screen behind them. Here's the bullet points. Here's us going through one by one. Everything was as measured as possible, and I couldn't tell you what it was about. Then they showed another speaker who was almost more, had a clipped-on microphone, no podium in front of them, no PowerPoint, but they had a picture of, it was like a picture of old ironwork fireplaces, like wood stoves that you would find in like log cabins. And this person loved restoring these. And so this 5-minute talk was about why, not just why, but what the process is like. And it was memorable, and I still remember these because what they were talking about, they were genuinely passionate about. And at the end of this, the facilitator said, do you understand the difference here? If you are actually passionate about what it is you are discussing, then it'll come across. It's going to be more engaging. People will listen, even if they're not interested in the subject.
Yeah.
Your authentic passion shines through when you actually speak about things that you genuinely have an interest in. If you are not genuinely interested in it, you can speak about it intelligently and deliver good information, and people will not retain that because it doesn't mean anything to them. This, to me, is a great example of and about Wu Wei. It doesn't take effort for me to talk about, Chinese history or, martial art movies of the 70s and 80s. Those things I can bore a person to death on because I find them infinitely fascinating.
Yeah. No, I love that connection too. I was going to say the same thing as well, in that, like, by doing something, in this case, doing something for a living that is in accordance with your, true nature or in accordance with your passion, you are, in a sense, going with the river, as opposed to doing something which you hate. The hours are going to drag by. It's going to be a slog. But I wanted to go back to your example of the very boring lecturer, and that I think part of the reason that he was so boring and kind of didn't resonate this charisma or this that we're talking about also is because he was very mechanical and very routinized, as it sounded like. He was just kind of going through the motions, just kind of reading from a script. Whereas, it seems a lot of times the best lecturers are the ones who are reacting in the moment. So it seems that's also maybe a part of the is that ability to kind of be spontaneous.
Yeah.
There are a few chapters in the Tao Te Ching where Lao Tzu is kind of speaking on behalf of kind of Wu Wei leadership, if we want to call it that. And there's this in chapter 60. Maybe I'll read your translation here. He says, "Govern a large nation as you would cook a small fish." And how I understand this is basically, if you're cooking a small fish, like in a frying pan or something, you don't want to just keep poking at it with the spatula over, turning it back and forth, because the fish is very delicate. It's going to disintegrate in the pan. You would think the more people you're going to lead and govern, the more intervention is going to be necessary. And Lao Tzu is kind of saying the opposite, actually. You want to kind of intervene less or again, not kind of overdo it.
That chapter is infinitely famous. Ronald Reagan quoted it, and it's treated as sort of the libertarian doctrine of minimal government interference. There is another component to it, though, and I think it is the most overlooked part, which is, how do you cook small fish? With deeply diligent attention and patience and awareness of when enough's enough. So it's not just about the poking and prodding. You do have to poke. You do have to prod. You do have to flip it. But you have to pay really close attention to it. You have to watch it like a hawk, because a very small fish will burn in no time. So
interesting.
To actually cook something so delicate, quote unquote, requires the utmost care, requires the utmost attentiveness. It's ironic because the metaphor is usually treated as get out of the way and stop doing things to it. But that's a recipe for a burnt fish. Cooking a small fish, you need to not do too much to it. But you need to be more attentive to it than you do to, the roast you put in the oven for a couple of hours that you can ignore.
That's a great distinction. Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, because we keep kind of coming back to this idea of attention as well. Like, we were talking with the spontaneity, how that kind of requires some attentiveness, some presence. This concept of wu wei is oftentimes spoken of in conjunction with the idea of flow, which is, there's the kind of famous book from a couple years back. And when we get into these flow states, we are kind of, in some ways, hyper present, but in other ways, we are not kind of self-consciously present. Yeah. In the sense that like hours can go by and we don't even realize it. So in a way, you could look at that and say, oh, that person's actually not that present right now. Like an hour just went by, they didn't even realize it, or they can't remember anything about the experience, etc. So I guess what I'm trying to get at here is it seems like this type of presence that we're trying to cultivate is not just like synonymous with just like self-consciousness or like even rationality, so to speak. It seems like it's a more intuitive kind of left brain type of, or right brain type of.
I would say intuition is a huge component for having good wu wei. You have to have good insights into situations, people, opportunities, circumstance. Yeah, wu wei is not synonymous with flow, though flow states allow for a lot of wu wei to occur for an individual. The direction sort of just goes one way.
Yeah, I'm seeing that's kind of like like flow falls under the umbrella of wu wei, but there can be wu wei without flows. It's
right, but wu wei is not under the umbrella of flow because there is more to it than that, and it's not necessarily about every action you take. Oftentimes, it's about the actions you don't take. Sometimes it's knowing when to keep your mouth shut because there's nothing you have to contribute to this moment that's going to actually be helpful. Watch them do what they're doing and let them do it because this could just work out on their own. Yeah, there's oodles of instances of this. Grandson, like I said, is 3. And it's been a hot summer up here, so we go to splash parks where they've got water toys and kids are all out there and there's 1,000 shouting toddlers and young kids running around. And 2 of them want to play with the same thing at the same time. Grandma wants to get up and go mediate the interaction.
Yeah.
Granddad puts a hand on her and says, give them a chance to work this out themselves.
Right.
This is something they need to develop. Sometimes wu wei isn't just about the actions you take, it's about the restraint of taking action. And that is in particular true in Zhuangzi's interpretation of wu wei and some later thinkers as well. This idea that you need to not just do the minimal thing, but sometimes the minimal thing is do nothing. Literally, just do nothing and watch. Like cooking a small fish. Do nothing, just watch. If and when the moment is necessary to do something, then do something. Flip the damn fish. Take it off the fryer. Go stop the boys from punching each other in the head, if they can't agree on the toy that they're going to both play with. But give them a chance. Let them see if they can't work this out because those are necessary skills people need in life, how to negotiate others.
Absolutely. I've been thinking about this a lot. I teach drum lessons for a living and, when to just let the student continue to struggle and when to jump in and say, hey, try this. This will make it easier. There's an art there. And again, I think there is a bias, not only within our culture, but also with, in this case, you're a service industry where it's like, this person's paying me all this money. like I should do something to, like for them to feel like they're getting them. But sometimes the best thing you can do is literally just sit there and keep your mouth shut.
Yeah. Yeah. Doing Tai Chi or teaching Tai Chi is very much like that, where, some people, there are times where I make sort of the perfunctory performance of intervention just to give them the feeling that, oh, he's doing something. I'll very classically get into posture and, pause. All right, everyone hold their posture, and I'm going to come around and make micro adjustments to your body, and you're going to feel like I'm doing something, and I'm going to feel like I'm doing something. But what I'm actually doing is I'm making you hold a static posture that is good for isometric contraction. It's good for strength building. It will help you to actually develop deep twitch muscles to hold these postures for even just a minute sometimes. And while you're doing that, which you could have just done by me saying pause and we all wait a minute. Yeah, that'd be the more Wu Wei thing. But yes, I have to put on the performance, because sometimes enough is in fact just slightly more than what's necessary for what you're actually aiming for when you want to increase something else you're aiming for, which is satisfied students.
Yeah. I wanted to pivot a little bit, and I want to try to transition into talking about the Tao. The first chapter is very famous for the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao, or it's translated a lot of different ways. I'd love to kind of go into that, but the way I'm understanding it, language by definition draws distinctions. So anytime we're using language to try to describe the Tao, it's going to be a failed endeavor. So
I'll give you the old lecture I used to give in a thumbnail. The Tao can't be talked about, but I'm going to try anyway. Here's a concept that I think most people don't grasp. There's this real nasty habit in humanities of wanting to define the thing that we are studying. So what is philosophy? What is art? What is religion? Those questions get asked, and they can frankly get a little tedious. But nobody in the linguistics department ever asks, or in the English department asks, what is English? But there isn't an English language, ontological reality, concrete thing, which is really bizarre when you think about it. You say, what's the English language? Somebody may pull out the Oxford English Dictionary and say, there it is. That's a snapshot in time of some of it. And those don't necessarily capture the whole thing. English is a process, a thing that it's not reified. It's not definable. I know it sounds weird to say that, but if you really think about it, and God help me, if you listen to a Xennial actually speak, you realize that this thing is not pinned down and corked and definable. I try to say on fleek at least once per class just to watch those students cringe.
I don't even know what that means.
I don't either.
Yeah,
I really
not my
don't.
generation.
It's just one of those. It's one of those terms that they came up with that I like to, stick the knife, because it makes them cringe to hear somebody over 40 say it. So we use this thing all the time that doesn't exist. It doesn't exist as a thing. There's not a thing there, which is really galling. But we're fine with it. We accept it. So does art exist? Does religion? We use it. We use it all the time. And defining it doesn't make it more or less. The whole reason I went to grad school to study what I studied was because a scholar basically pissed me off by saying, you can't be a Taoist if you were raised in this hemisphere. I'm sorry, what? What? The very philosophy, the very school of thought that talks about dissolving these sort of distinctions and categorizations, and you're going to be the arbiter to put up those categorizations. Yeah. And so
the irony.
I just, this struck me as, did you get any of the lessons of the thing you study to come up with this paper? Which really just chapped my butt. But, yeah, the whole point is humans categorize, humans make distinctions. We use language as the tool to do that. And that is an inevitability, because we're Noam Chomsky, we're hardwired to acquire language. We have a built-in grammar. We have a built-in need for that categorization and distinction. And I watched my grandson, as he's just turned 3, acquire and gain command over language better and better each year, and how much he enjoys being able to communicate more clearly with those around him. It's a really handy tool to have. But it's so handy that we succumb to the temptation to mistake the word for the thing.
Yeah.
And in fact, we make that habit so deeply ingrained that we accidentally will draw distinctions that we probably shouldn't.
You said something along the lines of, we mistake the word for the reality, or I forget how you phrased it exactly, but
yeah, we mistake the word for the thing.
The word for the thing. Watt says a very similar thing. He says Tao cannot be defined in words and is not an idea or concept. As Chuangzi says, it may be attained but not seen. Or in other words, felt but not conceived, intuited but not categorized, divined but not explained. In a similar way, air cannot be cut or clutched, and their flow ceases when they are enclosed. There is no way of putting a stream in a bucket or wind in a bag. And then he says later, which I love that way of thinking, he says, there's also the temptation to confuse the rules or laws of grammar and mathematics with the actual operations of nature. Our thoughts do not necessarily represent trees and rocks. Thoughts grow in brains as grass grows in fields. Any correspondence between them is abstract. And again, I think that's one of those things that we just forget. We forget that, okay, this is actually just a tool that I'm using to describe this thing, but it's not the actual thing.
Yeah, and I think we necessarily forget at times. It'd be virtually impossible to navigate life always on contingency, in the sense of I'm thinking that's a chair, and so I'm going to sit on it. But I understand that my concept of chair may be flawed, and that could actually be a miniature table, and you can't operate in the world like this. I kind of went through this in a philosophy 101 class, where we got through the first couple of units, and somebody just said, "Does anyone know anything? Is anyone certain about anything? Because I'm thoroughly convinced nobody has anything that they know at all."
Socrates would be happy with that statement.
And I looked at her and I said, "Is your bed in your room?" She said, "What?" I said, right now, are you pretty sure that you go back to your room, your bed is in your room?" And she looked at me. I said, "And you didn't have to think about it. You just know it. And you operate in your life knowing this thing without constantly calling it into question."
Yeah.
So it is okay to give things names, to identify them, to navigate the world around us, and to even sometimes have a semantic argument where my daughter said she's going to a rave. She bought tickets online, and it's at the Tacoma Dome, and me pounding my Gen X head into a table saying, that is not a rave. If you can buy tickets online and the cops are not arriving, this is not a rave. We made that term. Ask me what it means. Yeah. I'll tell you about the
diet.
I can have
rave.
this semantic. Yeah, I can have this semantic argument and feel good about it. But in the back of my brain is going to be the constant awareness that all of this is convention to some degree, and that convention is not absolute.
One other point that I would love to talk about is Yin and Yang. I actually learned this in my research for this. Yin and Yang actually predates the Tao Te Ching, and is actually mentioned in the I Ching, which was kind of written around 1000 BC.
Yeah, the first of Chinese classics.
Way back. So, yeah, do you want to kind of take a stab at Yin and Yang and how this kind of fits into what we're talking about?
We live in modern era. We have CGI. We've all seen Star Wars. So we can play an imagination game. Take the spaceship and head out of the galaxy. Turn around and look. There's everything. That's the way things are. That's the way. But there's more than that. So we got to take it even further, and we got to get outside of galaxies so that we're looking at everything. And that's the way, which is another way of translating Tao, way. That's the way it is. So I'm going to take a snapshot of it. Now I've got a picture of the Tao. Except when I look at the snapshot and I look up at the way things are, they don't match up, because the way things are have changed from the snapshot I took, because everything is in motion. All of the universe, all of the galaxies, all the stars, every atom in our body, everything is in motion. The way, Tao, capital T, that Lao Tzu is talking about, is both in that snapshot and in that vista. And if we photoshopped everything out of it, that would still be the way it could have been, the way it was, the way it is, the way it's going to be. But that motion is essential for the existence of everything there. That motion is qi, which is a Chinese concept that is also predating Taoism. But when the Tao Te Ching talks metaphysics, chapter 42 is my go-to chapter for this. And that says really simple, from the Tao came the one, from the one came the two, from the two came the three, and from the three came the 10,000 many things, everything. So the Tao is that blank slate, that fertile void that anything could have been, any vista could have been put upon. The one is that motion, that necessary element to get everything to exist. Because lots of things don't exist without motion, and that includes time, which is really, really weird to think about, but it's true. Time is a function of motion. Without motion, there isn't time.
Yeah.
So, okay, everything exists, everything's in motion. Now what can we know about it? Well, sometimes it's much more dynamic, and sometimes it's much more receding. Sometimes it's much more active, and sometimes there's just this latent potentiality, almost like the latent potentiality of that fertile void that we saw. These ideas are yin-yang, which are relativistic terms that, yes, they are predating the Tao Te Ching, and the original characters are the sunny side of a hill and the shady side of a hill, which gives this idea that the hill exists. You got to have a hill that has both a yin side and a yang side. And for those playing along at home, black fishy white eyeball, that's yin. white, fishy, black eyeball, that's yang.
Mm-hmm.
The Tao Te Ching mentions yin yang once, and it's in that same chapter 42. And it says yin is to be preferred by the Taoists because that yin is more wu wei. That yin is more like the Tao. Yang is what we're going to do. It's natural. It's easy. It's dynamic. It's flash in the pan. I was a competitive kickboxer. There is no old timers league for competitive kickboxing. There's no old timers league for football, for MMA, for the list goes on. You can do these things briefly, dynamically, amazingly. And the cost? Well, cauliflower ears, brain injuries, bad knees, etc., 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 etc. It's a choice. You can make that choice. Taoists say that's a choice that kind of sucks, though, because that's a lot of dynamic excitement up front and years of suffering on the back end. Better if you could be a little more wu wei. Maybe it'd be good not to be the gold medalist and still have functional knees when you're in your 70s.
Yeah.
I mean, not for everybody, but for the wise person, this is not such a bad deal. I was bitter, depressed, and resentful about being on a cane. Years in the rearview mirror, I don't have cauliflower ears. My knees are nowhere near as bad. I have nowhere near as many head injuries. I probably lucked out by not going as far with that as I wanted to. The metaphysic of the Tao is in an instruction manual for how we navigate the Tao. You can be yang. That's perfectly legit. And in relativistic terms, you're going to be more yang than someone else. I am more yang than Audrey Hepburn, probably, because I think of her as the pinnacle of femininity. But you put me and Arnold Schwarzenegger in a room together, I'm the yin one. They're relativistic terms. Things are more yin or more yang relative to something else. Only in sort of a grand sense is there a penultimate yin or penultimate yang. And those penultimates are in the Tao and in Qi. Qi being the more yang manifestation that the Tao doesn't need, but Qi needs the Tao. And Tao is definitely the more yin manifestation.
You said something earlier about, the Tao tends towards generativity.
Yeah.
And it seems like this is one of our chances to maybe connect the metaphysical with this, the more ethical, this kind of concept of wu wei, and that, like, if the Tao tends to be generative, this could play out in the sense of, like, the body is going to naturally heal itself. Homeostasis is kind of at the core of, you injure your calf muscle, therefore doing nothing or, giving yourself time to rest and not intervening, the body is going to return to homeostasis. I think there's also, we read this chapter 60 and the more kind of Reagan libertarian take on that. I think that's kind of at the base there. That's kind of the, something happens in the society, instead of doing something as the government, just let it kind of work itself out. But in that, you're kind of have to have some kind of explicit or implicit belief that, society is generative, or that people are going to kind of naturally get along.
Yeah.
So in a sense, some of it seems kind of Rousseauian as opposed to kind of like Hobbesian.
Yeah. I suppose I do think there is definitely more a optimism to Taoism than sort of Hobbes' pessimism as far as the view of humanity goes.
Yeah.
But having faith in people is also very tricky because there is the realization that people, especially as a herd, are cyclic. As much as yin and yang, as much as summer, winter, as much as anything, the herd of humanity goes through cycles. China is evidence of those cycles in, how it comes together, forms a dynasty, gains control, spreads out, disintegrates, collapses, is tumult, that sort of ebb and flow of their society, of Chinese society, for thousands of years has created not a sense of faith in people in a absolute, but faith in people to follow cyclic behaviors and a need to recognize where in the cycle you are at any given time. Does that mean that there's nothing to be done about it? There were stories during the Chinese Civil War and the subsequent Cultural Revolution of Taoist temples that were just abandoned. That suddenly, the Red Guard would show up, at the top of a mountain or someplace, and they'd find a temple and it had been abandoned. Lights are out, doors are locked, nobody's there. The Chinese Civil War started at the end of World War II and went into the 50s. The Cultural Revolution begins in the 60s. You are looking at almost 40-ish years before Mao Zedong dies and Deng Xiaoping winds up being in charge of China, and the acceptance of temples, religions, priests becomes once again allowable in the Chinese society. One of the people reading at the meetups was reading Red Pine's translation. I love Red Pine. He's a really nice guy. I got to meet him. And he did a docuseries for years in China where he was part of a radio station out of Hong Kong, where they just said, go do a weekly broadcast. And so he wound up traveling the mountainsides to go interview hermits in the mountains. This was in the late 80s and I believe early 90s. Really interesting story. But during that time, after this upheaval of society for so long, and after these Taoist temples had been closed for decades, generations they'd been closed, he'd start broadcasting stories of, in other news today, the Golden Plum Lotus Temple in Lower Xinjiang is apparently back open because some Taoist hermit just came off the side of the mountain, flipped the key, opened the shop, dusted out, and started picking up right where they left off 40 years prior. Sometimes to navigate the worst of humanity, you do retreat entirely. But that doesn't mean you give up hope. You recognize the cyclic nature of it. A lot of those temples closed, and a lot of those Taoist priests just said, time to get out of Dodge for a while. Let's go up the mountains and hermit a little higher than we have last year. And some of those hermits were up there for decades. I mean, long time before word got to them that now it's no longer the Cultural Revolution. Now you're not going to be dragged off to a work camp. And so many just came right down from the mountains, opened up the temple that they found empty, and started up again like it had never even happened. Not that they are unaware of what had happened that was the way to navigate the herd of humanity that was China in that time. And that was a gigantic herd. And that was a new ghost or spirit entering the society, the ghost or spirit of communism as an idea, which had not existed in China in any way, shape, or form before that. The faith in people to always do what's right is not something present within the Taoist mindset, but the faith in people ultimately to get back to doing something righter is in the cycle of humanity. It's as inevitable as cherry blossoms in spring. It will happen. It just may take a long winter to get there.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great distinction. Well, as we're kind of closing down here, I was, kind of thinking about this podcast in itself. As I've done it over the years, I've become more and more wu-wei. The first ones I was very kind of controlling, trying to really like direct the conversation. If my guests would take it somewhere where I didn't want them to go, I'd kind of, try to bring them back. And now it's like, I know my guests at some level. I, think well of them, and I trust that like wherever we go is going to be great. So, is there anything that we left out that you'd like to add before we close it out?
No, this was a great conversation. You are more way with this because you've done it. You know where it's going. You know how long it's going. I have no idea if every time there's silence I should be speaking or if I need to speak more, but that's also the professor in me. Yeah. I would encourage anybody hearing this and anybody who's interested, any of the sources we talked about, Alan Watts or Edward Slingerland, both great reads on Chinese concepts and Taoist concepts. I would add to that anybody who's like very interested in the history of Taoism and its evolution. I believe it's Ava Wong who wrote the book Taoism. It's a really good read on the practice of this thing called Taoism throughout history in very sort of long form. She goes all the way back to the Shang dynasty and talks about here's what it looked like when shaman in the Lohan Valley were doing, these practices and how it's tied in. I would ask, especially anybody listening who's a native English speaker and native to the Western mindset, if you're trying to figure out what is Taoism or what are Taoist ideas, you can abandon that a little bit. There's an old joke that a buddy of mine, a Jewish buddy of mine, said, you get two Jews in a room, you're going to have three opinions. And I used to say, well, you get two Taoists in a room, you'll have at least three opinions, but nobody's going to be talking about it if they're any good. Because those who know don't speak, and those who speak don't know, chapter 56. And I've just proven how much I don't know about Taoism by talking ad nauseum about it. Point being, anybody is welcome to engage with this. And don't let some gatekeeper tell you, oh no, you're not understanding it right. Well, you're not understanding it right. You can always understand it better. I don't understand it right. Right is not the thing. Better is what we can probably always do with it.
Yeah, if ever there was a text for, a multitude of interpretations and, not trying to nail down one concrete definition of, a lot of these terms, I think this is the text for it.
Is it a philosophy? Is it a religion? Yep. And then more. It's also a political treatise. It's also a great guide to cooking and a wonderful guide to exercise and.
Yeah, the applications are really endless. Well, thank you so much, Amon. This has been incredible. So I think people are really going to enjoy it.
It was my pleasure.
Excellent. We'll wrap it up there. Hey, this is Zach. Thanks so much for listening to Unpacking Ideas. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe wherever you're listening so that you can get notified every time I release an episode. And if you would like to hear more about what's coming up next on the podcast or to get in touch with me, visit unpackingideas.com/podcast. And finally, if you would like to hear more from Amon or get in touch with him, you can find his videos at 52 Living Ideas, the YouTube channel, and just search for Tao Te Ching. And you can contact him at amonra16.ag@gmail.com. All right, that's it for today. I will see you next episode.